Bueno, hoy está con nosotros Amy Morin. Amy es psicoterapeuta, es autora internacional. Su bestseller se llama 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do, o sea, 13 cosas que la gente mentalmente fuerte no hace. Ha sido traducido en 39 idiomas. Su plática TEDx, The Secret of Becoming Mentally Strong, es una de las más vistas en YouTube. Ella es articulista para Forbes, para Business Insider, para Psychology Today, y es un placer tenerla con nosotros porque muchas veces sentimos que no somos mentalmente fuertes por el cúmulo de cosas que han pasado en nuestra vida. Y les cuento nada más que Amy, cuando tenía 23 años, su mamá murió repentinamente por un aneurisma en el cerebro. Se volvió, después su esposo, cuando ella tenía 26 años, muere repentinamente de un ataque cardíaco. Se vuelve a casar 4 años más tarde y su suegro, con quien era sumamente cercana, fue diagnosticado con un cáncer inoperable. Y la pregunta que se hizo Amy en aquel entonces fue, ¿por qué me pasa a mí esto una y otra vez? Y ahí fue cuando ella decidió hacer público su propio camino hacia la resiliencia y decidió hacer este libro pensando que le podía ayudar a alguien más. So I just gave your bio and talked a little about your past, and I would like for you to share with all the audience, and welcome to the show, why you decided to write this book.
So I was a therapist and was teaching other people how to be mentally strong based on what I'd learned in college, but my mother suddenly passed away, and it was the first big loss in my life. And it was my first opportunity to say, okay, I'm interested in mental strength for my own journey, not just for other people's sake. And I started studying people that came into my therapy office and realized that what helped some people get through painful experiences best wasn't always about what they did. Sometimes it was more about what they didn't do. And 3 years to the day that I lost my mother, my 26-year-old husband passed away from a heart attack. And it taught me a lot about grief and pain and getting through tough times. And I focused on what not to do. At the time, I was too overwhelmed to think about doing 101 good habits, but I could focus on just don't do these certain bad habits. And a few years later, when my father-in-law was diagnosed with terminal cancer, I wrote myself a letter about what mentally strong people don't do. And when I was done, I had a list of 13 things, and I would read over those 13 things during the darkest days of my life. And I found it to be really, really helpful. And so I published it online, hoping that a few people might find it helpful, but never imagined it would go viral. But 50 million people read that letter, and everybody assumed I wrote it because I was a therapist and I knew all of those things. But the truth was that I struggled with all 13 of those things. And it was really meant to be a personal letter to remind myself not to do those unhelpful things that would keep me stuck, just like I saw it keep so many of my clients stuck too. But if I could just not do those things, then I could get through the tough times and heal my broken heart.
That's amazing. Dice que la razón por la cual decidió escribir este libro es porque pensó no solamente en todos los demás, pero todo empezó como un ejercicio autoterapéutico. Ella, siendo terapeuta, después de perder a su madre, que fue pues la pérdida más grande que ha tenido. Después, a los 26 años, su esposo muere de un ataque cardíaco. Después, su suegro, como les acabo de contar, es diagnosticado con cáncer terminal. Se dio cuenta de que necesitaba poner en perspectiva todas las cosas que eran necesarias que hiciera una persona o que no hiciera una persona que es mentalmente fuerte. Como un autorrecordatorio de todos los errores o los malos hábitos en los que ella no quería caer. Y escribió esa carta como una carta a ella misma para poder revisitar una y otra vez y recordar lo que ella debía de hacer en este ejercicio curativo y terapéutico. Y nunca se imaginó que más de 50 millones de personas iban a leer esa carta e iba a conectar tanto con tanta gente que se siente igual. Y entonces de ahí salió la idea, después de ver esa carta, y se las voy a compartir igualmente en redes, que tenía 13 puntos muy concretos de lo que no debía de ser una persona mentalmente fuerte. Y así es como decide pues escribir este gran libro. So, not feeling sorry for yourself. That's number one. No matter what has happened to you, no matter if you do or do not understand why you're living what you're living. Because what we tend to do is try to put things that happen to you into perspective and find the explanation of why you lost your husband, of why you lost your child, of why, you have so many issues professionally, why you are born in the family you're born in. And when you cannot explain all this to yourself, then the summary is, it's because I'm miserable. It's because I don't deserve better. It's because I'm a bad person. It's because life sucks. It's because I'm the unluckiest person on earth.
Yeah, that's it exactly. We draw those kinds of conclusions. And when we develop those beliefs, well, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you think the world is out to get you and nothing good is ever going to happen, you'll behave in a way that actually makes that become true.
Dice, pues es que claro, el problema es que entre más te repites todo eso, se convierte en algo de lo que hemos hablado mucho en el programa, que es una profecía autocumplida, en donde empieza a suceder todo lo que no querías que sucediera, porque lo has dicho tanto que tú actúas desde esa postura y eventualmente todo lo que no querías que pasara por tu conducta y tu aproximación a la vida, justamente acaba sucediendo. Okay, we got that down. Number 2.
That they don't give away their power.
Okay, shoot.
So this one is really about knowing I'm in control of how I think, feel, and behave. And giving away my power drains my mental strength. So if I say my mother-in-law makes me feel bad about myself, well, I'm giving her power over how I feel. Or if I say my boss makes me come to work, I'm giving him power. It's a choice if I come to work. Of course, there's consequences if I don't show up, but it's up to me. So taking back your power is really about just recognizing the language that you use and that you don't have to do these things and nobody's forcing you to feel certain ways, that you could be in control of your emotions, the way that you think, and the actions that you take.
No, give me more examples. Give me more examples so I can translate the whole piece.
Okay, so maybe you have road rage. You think somebody's making me mad. This person ruined my day. It's not okay for somebody to say these things to me because it just sets my day off wrong. That somebody made me mad. Nobody has control over how you feel. Nobody has control over the emotions that you have, the actions that you take. Yeah. So it's really about taking back that power and saying it's up to me to decide what kind of day I'm going to have and how I'm going to feel.
I talk a lot about, I give this example about regarding power. The other day, a friend of mine came to me and she said, well, I asked her, how are you doing? Because I knew she was like not well with her husband. And she said, well, he already left me. And I said, don't you ever say that again, because you can leave a book on a table. You can leave a child in a park. You can leave the keys misplaced somewhere, but nobody can leave you. He left, which is different, but never phrase that again, because you are surrendering all your power when you use that term. And I think, do you agree?
Absolutely. That's a great example.
So it's like when mothers say, oh, your dad is not coming back because he left us. It's not only you include the kids. So the words and the phrases and the way we think about situations that happen to us is a constant feeding of the loss of our power.
Exactly. And if we took the example of what's going on in the world right now, so many people are saying things like, I'm stuck at home. Well, no, you can decide to say, I'm going to choose to stay home to make myself safer and help other people feel safe. But just that subtle shift in your mentality makes a big difference.
Absolutely. I love it. I love point number 2. Le digo que el punto número 2. Lo que la gente mentalmente fuerte no hace, nunca entrega su poder. ¿Y qué significa eso? Nunca frasea las cosas, nunca vive las cosas como que alguien más tiene poder sobre él. Como que estoy teniendo que venir a trabajar por culpa de mi jefe. Como si tú no tuvieras una opción de decidir. Aquí hay consecuencias, hay consecuencias. Pero siempre sabiéndote que tú puedes no ir. Ahorita en la pandemia, el contarte de, es que estoy encerrado en mi casa o tengo que estar encerrado en mi casa. ¿Por qué no voltearlo y decir, yo opto por guardarme en casa porque me quiero proteger? Retomar tu poder. Y yo le pongo mucho el ejemplo de una amiga que algún día me dijo, Le dije, ¿cómo vas? Y me dice, pues ya me dejó. Y le dije, en tu vida vuelvas a decir eso. Porque uno deja un libro en una mesa, uno deja un niño en un parque, uno deja unas llaves en un lugar incorrecto, pero a ti no te pueden dejar, tú no eres un libro y no eres una niña y no eres unas llaves y no eres un celular olvidado en un restaurante. Cuando tú dices eso, renuncias al poder que tienes de decir, él decidió irse, pero de eso a que a mí me dejan, hay una historia totalmente diferente. Y vamos tan lejos como en decir, de repente hasta en plural, es que tu papá no va a volver porque nos dejó, e incluyes también a tus hijos, ¿no? Entonces, creo que cómo lo vives, o a veces, por ejemplo, estás en el tráfico y alguien te mentó la madre y de repente tú te volteaste y le reventaste la madre y crees que tu reacción es resultado de la provocación del otro. Cuando alguien que tiene poder toma la decisión sobre cómo va a reaccionar, cómo va a contestar, qué va a hacer con lo que acaba de pasar, porque nadie es responsable de lo que tú haces o dejas de hacer. Y la gente mentalmente fuerte nunca entrega su poder. I love you, sister. I feel you. Okay,
Thank you.
shoot. Give me number 3.
That they don't waste time trying to please everyone.
Oh my God, don't go there. I think we were talking about how difficult it is to say no, like a couple of weeks ago. So explain.
So, I run into so many people in my therapy office. I've done it in my own life where you say yes way too many times to things you don't want to do or people, and you think that you're making them happy. And you think it's up to you to be responsible for other people's emotions. It's like we know you can't, other people aren't responsible for yours. You're not responsible for theirs. But so often we do all of these things and we think that we're making somebody happy and we have no idea how the other people actually feel. It's not up to us. We need to just be in control of how we think, feel, and behave and not worry about other people to the extent that we lose sight of our values, that we change our priorities, that we start doing all of these things that really don't matter, because it's so easy to lose sight of the life that you want to live when you're so busy running around trying to make other people happy all the time.
But isn't there, Amy, like a fine line between that and being an ass?
There is. And so it's really about recognizing, I want to be a polite, a kind person, but I don't need to do it at my own expense, that I can still have self-respect and that I can still choose to pursue my own happiness and do the things that I truly enjoy in life. And if other people aren't always pleased with it, that's okay. And I can be okay with that.
And that must come from a profound need of being liked, of being accepted, of fear of rejection, of not feeling that you're valuable enough to be able to say no, or I don't want to do this, and take your stand and not be afraid of the consequences.
Exactly. And for a lot of us, it boils down to our self-worth. It's like, I'm only as good as other people like me. Yeah. And so if other people like me a lot, then I'm okay with me. But then if somebody's mad at me, then I think, oh, I'm not good enough, or I've done something wrong. And so it's really about knowing that I can be okay with who I am. And if other people aren't okay, that's okay too.
Bueno, dice que el punto número 3 es aprender a no quererle dar gusto a todo el mundo todo el día. Y se lo resumo así. Y le digo, lo que pasa es que hay una fina línea entre no ser así y ser una perra. Entonces dice, el chiste es que no acabes dándole gusto a los demás a tus expensas, a tu salud, a tu tranquilidad. Y tendemos a estirarnos de esta manera porque obviamente tenemos de repente una gran necesidad a la aceptación, un gran miedo al rechazo, una necesidad de ser incluidos, tomados en cuenta. Y como dice Amy, esto tiene que ver mucho con el amor propio y con el autovalor que tienes, porque al final tienes pavor de que por ponerte en esta posición y pintar tu raya y tener límites y a veces decir no, porque no quiero, porque no me va, porque no me siento bien, porque no me hace bien, es peligroso, porque tienes pavor a ser rechazado, a no ser incluido, y porque amarras mucho tu amor propio y tu autovalor a cuánto te quiere la gente o cuánto te acepta la gente o cuánto te celebra la gente o cuánto dice la gente, ay, es que es una lindísima persona. Y yo creo que eso también pasa muchísimo en las relaciones, cuando de repente te empiezas a mutilar por amor, a lo que hemos hablado mucho en Revista MOA. I was saying that also happens a lot in relationships. In my magazine, we actually made an article that's called When You Mutilate Yourself for Love. And not learning how to say no, even in a relationship, you know, like, oh, I cannot cut my hair because my husband will kill me. I cannot go on a trip with my friends because he doesn't like it. I don't see my friends for domino and beers on Thursday because my wife will kill me. And all these things that you stop doing and you start transforming yourself in the name of damn love.
Absolutely. I see that all the time too, that people lose sight of themselves and that they get kind of caught up. And then years later, they're angry, they're resentful, they're bitter because they're thinking, I didn't get to do all the things I wanted to do. And they're unhappy, but it's really their own fault because they didn't choose to pursue those things themselves.
Claro. Dice, me encuentro con muchísima gente así que de repente pasan los años y están furiosos por todo lo que dejaron de hacer o por todo lo que hicieron que no querían hacer. Y no es responsabilidad ni culpa de absolutamente nadie, más que de uno mismo, y por no haber tenido la fe y el compromiso con uno mismo de perseguir lo que uno quiere. And besides, many times, you try to please people all the time because you want them to owe you an invoice. So maybe the nicer you are, the more in debt they are with you. And then, 25 years down the line, your husband leaves you for a younger model, and you're furious because you've done everything for him, as if you did not have the power and the decision at the time.
Right. The ironic thing is a lot of times people will come into my office saying, well, I don't want to be selfish. So that's why I always do these things. But sort of underneath all of that is that really strong desire to be liked, to make somebody happy, and to sort of manipulate the situation. And in the end, kind of is a selfish thing to say, I'm going to do all of these things just so I'm better liked, but then I'm going to be mad at you if you don't do what I want you to do down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. Dice, le digo que claro, lo que pasa es que muchas veces uno hace todas estas cosas porque quieres que el otro te deba una factura y que esté eternamente en deuda contigo. Y entonces 25 años después, cuando tu marido te deja por una chava más joven, estás mentando madres porque dices, no puede ser después de todo lo que hice yo por él. Sin asumir la responsabilidad de que tú tenías todo el poder y toda la decisión de hacer o no hacer lo que hiciste. Y dice que muchísima gente va a su consultorio, obviamente hablar de eso y tratar de entender cómo ser así y no ser egoísta, cómo poner límites, cómo ser asertivo, cómo buscar tus sueños, pedir lo que quieres, no aceptar lo que no quieres, no negociar lo que para ti no es negociable, y no caer como una persona egoísta y perra. Can we make a break, Amy? Can you hold the break?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Vamos a hacer una pausa y regresamos con Amy Morin. El libro se llama 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do, aquí en W Radio. 13 cosas que la gente mentalmente fuerte no hace. Vamos a regresar con las que siguen después. No se vayan.
Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Oh, it's great to have you on the show. Estamos con Amy Morin. Ella es psicoterapeuta y autora de un super bestseller que se llama 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do, o sea, 13 cosas que la gente mentalmente fuerte no hace. Y aparte, déjenme decirles que después vamos a subir las redes, esta conversación, porque ustedes lo están escuchando por la radio, pero yo estoy viendo a Amy me está viendo a mí porque estamos haciendo Zoom, y eso después también lo vamos a subir a YouTube. Entonces, estamos hablando de las cosas que la gente que mentalmente es fuerte no hace. Ya hablamos de sentir autolástima, ya hablamos de entregar tu poder, ya hablamos de instalarte en el pasado, ya hablamos de so we talked about not surrendering your power, we talked about not feeling sorry for yourself, and I'm missing one.
And we talked about not trying to please everyone.
Hear me? Sí, no tratar de darle gusto a todo el mundo. So what's number 4?
That they don't focus on things that they can't control. And so often we put our energy into all of those things that we have no control over. We worry about, are people going to have fun at a party that I'm throwing? Is the weather going to be okay next week? Are people going to like me at this job interview? All you can do is focus on how you behave, and to focus on what you're going to do, rather than trying to change other people, or rather than trying to make people like you, or trying to make good things happen. If you just put your energy on the things you could control, your life would be so much easier and so much better.
Dice que el cuarto error que cometen las personas que no son mentalmente fuertes es el tema del control, del cual hemos hablado muchísimo en este programa, que es el talón de Aquiles de muchos de nosotros, y es la cantidad de tiempo y energía que pierdes en tratar de controlar cosas que son irrelevantes, cosas que no puedes controlar, desde un evento, de si la gente se la pasó bien en tu fiesta, no se la pasó bien en tu fiesta, si tu pareja hizo esto, si debe de hacer aquello. Entonces, perdemos mucho tiempo queriendo controlar lo que es incontrolable, y perdemos la oportunidad de manejar cosas que sí son manejables. Understood. Number 5.
That they don't shy away from change. Because so often we want things to stay exactly the same. And so we put all of our energy and effort into trying to make everything stay exactly the way it is. Even when things are bad, we think, well, I don't want to make things worse. Or we think, at least if things are really rough right now, at least I'm not doing anything that's too difficult for me. I can handle things being kind of bad, but I don't want things to be really bad.
Dice, no tenerle miedo al cambio. La verdad es que todos los seres humanos quisiéramos que las cosas permanecieran iguales, y tratamos de que las cosas no cambien, pero al contrario, cuando empiezas a darte cuenta que la mejor cosa que puedes hacer es fluir con todo lo que va pasando, con todo lo que va cambiando. And I think talking about change, what we're living right now as a humanity is an amazing change, and a change that we certainly wish we could control, but we're obviously not able to control. And also the fact that we always have this false sense of being able to control the future. And I think that this has been, and I imagine you feel the same way, an amazing lesson of realizing that life can change from one day to another, and that you never imagine what can happen tomorrow. And I think that March 14th, which was like the D-Day for us in Mexico, which was the day in which most of us quarantined and have been quarantined for the last like 67 days, like March 13th, we never thought that the next day we would not leave our homes for the next 60 whatever days. Entonces, I think that what we're living has been an amazing lesson on change and creativity and adaptability. Don't you agree?
I do. And I hear so many people, though, who are worrying about, all of these things in the future, and what's going to be the future of our health, and what's the future of the economy. You can't control any of those. So you say, well, what do I have control over today? Maybe it's your effort. Maybe it's your attitude. Maybe you're just going to stay home, and that's what you can control, is how much contact you have with people, whether you decide to reach out to somebody, how you're going to cope with your uncomfortable feelings. Those are all things you can control. But so often we watch the news and we just think all of this doom and gloom and dread, and we think this is going to be awful. You could waste hours thinking about all of those things that you have zero control over. And if you just put your energy into the things you do have control over, you can make things so much better.
Claro, dice que yo creo que esto que hemos vivido es una gran lección para todos, porque nos damos cuenta de que las cosas sí pueden cambiar de un momento para otro. Todos los que entramos en cuarentena el día 14, que fue como el día clave para muchos en México, pues el día 13 jamás pensaste que al siguiente día te ibas a meter en cuarentena y que ibas a estar en cuarentena 66 días o 60 o los que lleven. Y cómo esto ha sido una gran lección para darnos cuenta de que sentimos que tenemos esta idea falsa de que controlamos el futuro y de que hacemos planes y de que manejamos lo que va a pasar, y yo creo que ha sido un trancazo para todos darnos cuenta lo equivocada que está esa premisa, y que al final esto ha sido una gran lección también para darnos cuenta lo adaptables que somos, lo creativos que somos, y que cuando es a la fuerza, esta resistencia al cambio natural que tenemos todos, pues totalmente a un segundo plano. Y me dice, sí, la verdad es que cuando te das cuenta con cosas como lo que acaba de pasar, de que no tienes control sobre el futuro, ni necesariamente lo que va a pasar mañana, te das cuenta lo innecesario que es enfocar tus esfuerzos y tu energía en querer controlar cosas que no tienen control. Shoot, girl.
The mentally strong people don't fear taking calculated risks. And the truth is, most of us don't even know how to calculate risk. We tend to think if something feels scary, it must be risky. But that's not how the world works, and that's not how risk works. But if you took the example of driving in a car, most of us think, oh, it feels fine, so we do it all the time. But if you're asked to give a speech in public, you might think, oh, I can't do that. That's too scary. Well, what's actually more risky? Getting in the car and driving to the speech is a lot more riskier than getting on stage. But when things feel scary, we think it's really risky. And so it's really about learning, how do you calculate risk? How do you manage your emotions when you're scared? And how can you think about risk differently?
Dice que el quinto, sexto error es no tomar riesgos calculados. Y el error que cometemos es creer que tomar un riesgo es hacer algo que te da miedo. Y no tiene nada que ver riesgo con miedo. Por ejemplo, muchos de ustedes, muchos de nosotros manejamos todos los días y lo hacemos porque nos sentimos confiados en que lo podemos hacer. No nos da miedo. Pero si mañana te dicen que tienes que hablar ante un público de 5,000 personas, te da pavor. La pregunta es, ¿qué genera más riesgo? ¿Manejar un coche o hablar enfrente de 5,000 personas? Entonces, que hay que aprender a tomar riesgos calculados y hay que entender que no tiene que ver nada con el miedo. So, if a risk doesn't have a correlation with fear, how do you understand what is a risk, you fearing it or not?
Right. So sometimes just writing something down helps us to make more sense of it. It raises our logic. When our emotions are really high because something feels scary, our logic goes down. If you want to figure out how logical is my fear, write it down, look at it on a piece of paper, and just say, what are the pros and cons of taking this risk? But then flip that piece of paper over and you write down, what are the pros and cons of not taking this risk? And sometimes that helps you to see, okay, this isn't as risky as I think it is. And also to check in with yourself. How am I feeling right now? Studies will show when we're really excited about a risk, we underestimate the chances that we'll fail. That's why people fall prey to a get-rich-quick scheme, because they're just thinking about all the good things that could happen. But when we're really anxious about something, we just dwell on all the bad things that could happen and we forget about the good things. So just checking in with yourself about how am I feeling and how my emotions might be clouding my judgment. And then write it down on a piece of paper and say, what are the pros and cons of taking the risk? What are the pros and cons of not taking the risk?
Dice que tendemos a confundirnos. Le digo, bueno, indistintamente de si te da miedo o no el riesgo, ¿cómo sabes si es un riesgo? Y dice, nos confundimos fácilmente por nuestra emocionalidad. Si algo te emociona mucho o te entusiasma o te dan muchas ganas, es probable que minimices las probabilidades de fracasar con lo que tienes o vas a hacer. Si es algo que te produce mucha ansiedad, probablemente pienses en todo lo que podría salir mal y en todo lo que podría ser negativo. Entonces, un buen ejercicio es tratando de poner tu emocionalidad al lado y tratando de checar tus sentimientos, es que escribas en una hoja de papel cuáles son los pros y los contras de tomar este riesgo. Y constantemente estés checando si lo que escribes no está empañado por tu emocionalidad, para bien o para mal. Y que después le des vuelta a esa hoja y del otro lado escribas cuáles son todos los pros y contras de no tomar ese riesgo. Nuevamente checando en que tu emoción no empañe y no sesgue lo que estás apuntando, para tomar riesgos calculados que no tengan que ver con si te parece que es un riesgo porque es algo que te da mucho miedo o no. I do not want to continue because I want everybody to read the rest of the 13 points in the book that has been translated, as I told everybody at the beginning, in 39 different languages, Amy. Obviously, certainly in Spanish, que es el secreto de las 13 cosas que la gente mentalmente fuerte no hace. Y ese libro está en México, lo encuentran seguramente en todas las plataformas donde venden libros físicos y digitales, para que le echen un ojo, pero esta mujer no tiene una idea que increíble. Vale mucho la pena que vean su plática de TEDx en The Secret of Becoming Mentally Strong, que es una de las más vistas, y que la sigan porque escribe para Forbes, para Business Insider, para Psychology Today. So before you leave, I just want you to say something to the audience. For everybody that's feeling anxious and nervous and uncertain, worried about the economy, about the future, about not knowing when this is going to stop, not knowing if they'll get sick, if not, if they're going to die, if they won't. How do you become, or how can you act mentally strong under the amount of stress we all are in?
So the first thing is to acknowledge our emotions and sometimes embrace them. We spend so much energy fighting them, thinking I shouldn't feel this way, or I have to feel better, I can't stand this. And that backfires on us. So to just acknowledge, okay, I'm feeling really anxious and that's okay. How am I going to take care of my anxiety today? And reach out for some healthy coping strategies, whether you do yoga, you meditate, you talk to a friend, you go for a walk, whatever it is that you do, just find healthy ways to deal with those uncomfortable emotions. And then to remember that you're stronger than you think. Your brain will always underestimate you and tell you, you can't handle this, you can't tolerate it, you're not going to make it through this. But your brain lies to you. And just remembering that, and that you can talk back to those thoughts that you have and remind yourself, I've been through tough things before, I can get through this too, you'll feel a lot better.
Consejo para todos los que se sienten ansiosos, con incertidumbres, sin definición del futuro, angustiados por la economía, por lo que va a pasar, si nos vamos a contagiar, si nos vamos a morir, y toda la serie de emociones y el estrés que estamos viviendo todos. ¿Qué les diría Amy a todos ustedes? Y dice, número 1, chequen sus emociones, reconozcan cómo se sienten, validen lo que sienten, conecten con lo que sienten y obviamente hagan cosas que les ayudan con esas emociones. Para muchos es hacer yoga o meditar o caminar o hablar con un amigo o ir a terapia o lo que sea. Pero canalizar esas emociones de manera positiva y constructiva es muy importante. Y segundo, también entender que de una u otra manera todos somos más fuertes de lo que pensamos. Seguramente nuestros pensamientos nos hacen sentir que no vamos a poder con lo que viene, de que va a ser complicado, de que no tienes las herramientas que se requieren para salir adelante, pero es muy importante que desactiven esos pensamientos y que se digan lo contrario y que se autoconvenzan, que era un poco lo que hablábamos ayer, de que todos somos más fuertes de lo que pensamos y que uno no es tan fuerte como cree, hasta que ser fuerte es la única opción que tienes y que tengan la fe y la confianza en que van a poder manejar lo que sea. I love the saying, you don't know how strong you are until being strong is the only option you have.
Yes, absolutely.
So Amy, thank you so much for being on the show. It was great meeting you and talking to you. We'll be sure to make sure that everybody reads the book. And thank you so much for sharing your work, your life, and your story.
Thank you for having me, Martha.
No, thank you. Big kiss all the way to Florida.
Thank you.
Take care. Bueno, pues es Amy Morin. Vale muchísimo la pena que todo el mundo lea el libro. Se llama Las 13 cosas que la gente mentalmente fuerte no hace. Ella tiene una historia de vida verdaderamente increíble y cómo es posible, como le hemos hablado en algún momento con Peggy Ostrowski, nuestra neuropsicóloga, es posible construir y digamos que fortificar tu resiliencia, no importa lo que hayas vivido. Con esto hacemos una pausa y regresamos.